This is an overview of the exhaust system. There's basically 5 parts to it. On each side, there's this piece which is attached to the intake manifold. That whole piece there includes the silencer at the back. So you've got one of those obviously on each side. You've got a joining clamp for the top pipe, and the bottom one, which I'll show you on the other side in a moment, is the tailpipe. So those 2 pieces join the 2 slides together, and finally you've got this big bracket here which is bolted to the back of the transmission by 4 big bolts there. The way the thing is hung, there's obviously the attachments at the flange here, which is connected to that exhaust manifold, and then the only other thing is just this thing here. There's a wraparound strap which holds on a single screw on the underside, which you can remove, and that whole thing comes loose, and it just sits on a little thing there that just holds on underneath it. There's nothing in here that actually holds onto the exhaust itself. This is all just there to hold up this end and hold that end of the exhaust manifold. Neither of my cars have the sports exhaust, but I'm expecting from what I've seen in pictures that in this corner here there's going to be the little actuating element with the vacuum line going to it. You would clearly need to disconnect the vacuum line prior to removing the exhaust. The workshop manual talks about a couple of different ways of removing this. First thing, you do it at one side at a time, or you can do it the whole thing as one element. And the way you do it as one element, the manual talks about removing, there's a single screw underneath here, there's that one, as well as these 2 here, that then allows this bracket to come out holding onto the whole exhaust. I tried that, couldn't do it. You can get access to these really easily, but the transmission sits right here, and on one side you can get access to these, on the other side it's really limited access. And the problem with these clamps is they're a strap that springs open, and it goes like that and goes hard up against the transmission. And I tried with the exhaust removed to try and get that out, and I couldn't. By contrast, doing it one side at a time is dead simple. It's very, very easy. So that is the way that I would advocate doing that. And the way you do that, on the underside here, there are 2 nuts that it's going to loosen those. And before I say anything, before you start anything at all, go and put some penetrating lubricant on all of the screws that you are going to undo. Because if you don't do that, you can have some problems. The ones I found most difficult are the ones on the straps down here. They nearly totaled themselves. On the inside, where there's contact, there's no corrosion, but on the outside, with the bit that you've got to thread through, is completely corroded. And without putting penetrating lubricant on those, you're just going to destroy those pretty rapidly. So the nuts that hold on to the exhaust manifold, the straps in here, and all of these connection points, just do that as the first thing, let that soak in, and then start after that. But to start disconnecting all of this, I want to loosen those 2 screws, and then this thing just starts to move around. I'm going to lower that, and I'm generally going to move that to the side, like that. Then I'm going to disconnect, well, not disconnect, but just loosen these, and that sleeve there will just push up to the side completely. You'll end up with a big gap in there. The bottom one won't be disconnected. And then what I can do is on both sides, I can remove that strap in there. So there's a single screw from the underside, remove that, the whole thing just opens up the strap, and I can just pull that off, just get out of the way. So I'm going to do that on both sides, as well as I'm going to remove both nuts on the flange there. There'll be a gasket in here, a metal gasket, that'll stay on the intake manifold because it's got the studs poking straight through, so it'll stay there. And once I've got all those points disconnected, the strap here, or the bracket that holds onto this, stops about there. So I can actually just lift this thing whole up a little bit and pull it to the sides, and then that will pull these bits here all apart. And this will have a big gap in it, that's fine, but the one here for the tailpipe that's still joined, it'll just pull apart, and then we can disconnect each side separately, and I'll show you how to do that. So loosen off those 2 nuts there, then you can rotate the tailpipe out, and then loosen these 2 nuts here. Then you can just move that to the side and move it all the way to one side, like that. And do the same for this. So we're going to move it all the way to the side, and with the nuts removed from where this connects to the exhaust manifold and those two straps removed from the bracket, now this can just be moved slightly to the side, and now you can see we've got a gap in between, and we can remove this side first. So we can lower this side down. Because of the shapes of this, I'm not going to be able to remove this one here. So we'll remove this, lower this down first, and then once that's removed, I'll remove the other side. Sometimes these things fall off, so if you've got another person here, you may want to just get them to pull these off as it starts to lower, or you can just tighten these up again just a little bit so they don't fall off when you remove them from the car. When you're lowering this side here, again, if you've got a person to help out, that's going to make life a little bit easier. So we're going to pull it out, we're going to rotate it a little bit down that way from when we're standing in the wheel well. We're going to pull it out of those two studs where it connects to the exhaust manifold, and then it'll squeeze in between this corner here, and you can't really see it here, but where that bracket holds onto it on the other side. If you have that second person, having them pull out on that corner of the bumper is going to help out a little bit to squeeze it down into that corner as you pull that down, and then support it as it comes down and pull these pieces off. I'm here by myself, so I've just got a transmission jack here. You can do it quite happily with one person without the transmission jack there, but when this is connected, it adds some weight to it, and the force wanting to lower it down, which makes it a little bit problematic around the brake calipers and stuff. Things just want to get caught up unless you can really put it in exactly the right spot where you want. So I would do that, remove that, then remove this out of the way, and then pull the whole thing down. So when you are removing each side out, what you really want to be careful of is where this flange goes, because if it gets stuck underneath one of these brackets here, it's a real pain. So my advice is to support underneath here with one hand, or get that second person to support it, lift it up and out, which happens pretty easily, and as we're going to pull it this way so it slides around the edge of the bracket, and it's going to just go in the gap in here. But then I'm going to concentrate as it's coming down here, concentrate on what's happening on here, because if it gets stuck in here, it's such a pain, and you're going to be worried about doing damage to brake lines and that sort of thing. So pull it out, and then what you want to do is try and feed it, so keep it relatively close to the drive shaft down here so it sort of slides out this way. Sounds common sense, but it's, when it gets stuck in there, it's such a pain. So the secret is to concentrate here. And now it's there. Now we can sort of rotate it back up a little bit, keep it close to the drive shaft down there so it's down in this gap here and not up here jammed against the side of the car, and now it'll come out really easily. And the same in reverse, so put it and sort of concentrate on keeping it near that flange as we're pulling up back here, and then you can slide it onto the studs and it'll just sit there quite happily and not move now. Prior to installation, make sure you clean up all the screws and nuts, etc. Especially if you put some lubricant on that before, because what we're going to do is put on some anti-seize paste, and I don't want that mixing with another lubricant which is under temperature, going to have all that come off. The anti-seize paste that's in the workshop manual is called Optimal MF, and it's a bit hard to find exactly what's in that stuff, but it seems like a moly based anti-seize paste. It's good for up to 1100 degrees. It is really, I mean, certainly here in Australia, very difficult to get hold of, as well as anything that's comparable to it, and it's frighteningly expensive. For example, a a 500 gram pot of this stuff costs well over $200 Australian, and a pot of Anti-Seize copper paste is about 10 bucks. So the fact that I can't get hold of it, and I have used copper Anti-Seize, decent copper Anti-Seize paste on this sort of thing for ages on different cars with similar sorts of exhaust systems with no problems at all. So that's what I'm going to do. Clearly people need to make their own decisions. There is some talk about whether or not you use a nickel-based Anti-Seize on stainless steel, etc. I personally have never had any issues before, so I'm going to use copper. Again, you can make your own decisions. For the gaskets, this is what they look like. These are typical metal gaskets for this sort of thing. They're made of a really soft metal that has a ridge on them that when they get clamped together, it squishes down the ridge here and seals it really nicely. So when you take these off, that ridge will have been removed and the thing will be pretty much flat. You can go and replace those, or you can do this. This is what I do. These are just a bushing removal tool. Rings of different sizes. And so what you can do is you can work out which side it needs to be pressed out onto. It's a bit difficult to see it, but if you feel it with your fingers, it's really easy. You can center it up like that and have it at the right size. So that's going to go on there, that's going to go on there, bit of timber over the top, bit of a gentle tap with a rubber mallet, and it'll just push that ridge out a little bit and it'll seal nicely on the way back. But again, your own decision on whether or not you go and buy new ones of those. Prior to installation, make sure you clean up all the contact surfaces. I would suggest using a brass brush because it's not going to scratch anything, but it's going to scrape off all the old carbon and that sort of stuff. So obviously the flange here, the same on the point where this attaches onto the exhaust manifold, the insides of all of these, etc., as well as all of these. And then I'm going to apply Anti-Seize paste to all of that prior to installation. And after you slide these across, there are arrows here which show you the edges of this one. So put those in the right spot and then torque that up. And once you've torqued these screws here, this can be rotated up into the correct position. Have a look at it before you remove and measure this distance in here from memory. The spec for these pipes is 24 mil and for the twin pipes is 14. I couldn't be exact, but measure yours before you start. And just put it up in the same spot and torque those screws there. Torque specs for all of the connection points at the flange here, 23 Newton meters. The wraparound strap here, 15 Newton meters. The clamping bracket here, 23 Newton meters. And on the tailpipe nuts at the bottom, 55 Newton meters.